Hello, everyone. It's Jolene here from Bookworm Adventure Girl. Welcome back. It is great to have you. As you can see, I have a guest with me, Lindy from Lindy's Magpie Reads. Lindy, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your channel?
Uh, my channel is Lindy's Magpie Reads, and I talk about books. It's BookTube, and I
Yeah,
love to read Canadian books. So this is right up my alley.
it is. And I'm very excited because we have a very special project that we are finally revealing to everyone. And it is the best can-lit books of the 21st century voted on by you. So I'm very excited. And when I thought about doing this project, I thought, Lindy is the person to get to do this with me. And she said yes when I asked her. So I am so grateful. So it's great to have you with me, Lindy. And I'm really looking forward to going through this list with you.
Well, thank you for doing all the hard work with the spreadsheet, and thank you to all you people who contributed, submitted your best titles. Yeah, it's definitely a group project.
Absolutely. Yeah, we couldn't do it without everybody else. So we had, or actually, maybe we will talk about, do you want to talk about where this idea came from and how we kind of started and where we got the idea?
Yeah, so you probably heard about the New York Times best books of the 21st century list. Their original list, they asked authors and book critics and that sort of people to contribute their top 10 books of the 21st century. And then right after that, there was a Reader's Choice Top 100 done in a similar sort of way. And in those combined lists, I couldn't help but notice there were only five Canadian books, which, it was an American list. So, that's their thing. But I thought, wouldn't it be great to have a Canadian list? And so that's what we did.
Yeah, so exciting. And we reached out to pretty much anyone that we could think of that we knew liked, Canadian literature. So we reached out on BookTube and we had other people do that as well. And I will link their videos below to some booktubers who gave us their top 10. So I will do that. But we reached out to people that we know love Canadian literature. So anywhere from like authors to booktubers, Instagrammers, people we know in real life in our, families and friend network. And we had a lot of responses back. We received over 65 responses, and our list is over 350 books altogether. We're not sharing all 350 because that would take forever. But I was so excited when I saw those come in. Yeah, to see everyone's top 10.
So, one of the things that happened is that even though we asked for books that were first published in the 21st century, we did get submissions of favorite Canadian books that were older. And I think we should give some special mention because Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood and Fall on Your Knees by Anne Marie MacDonald, both of those came up numerous times. Also, A Fine Balance by Rohinton Mystery, and The Colony of Unrequited Dreams by Wayne Johnston, Fugitive Pieces by Anne Michaels. Now, I did notice that Anne Michaels had more recent titles submitted, three different titles, but there weren't enough votes for any of those titles for any of her books to make our final list. And that happened with other popular Canadian authors as well. So at some point in the future, I hope that we can do something with those authors that lots of people love and they nominated their books, but they didn't end up making our top 67.
It was sometimes sad to see the authors that didn't make the list, or that didn't have enough votes to make the list, and yet we know they're fantastic authors. So we'll definitely make sure that we give them a shout out in some way at some point. From 352 of our books, 282 of them are fiction, And 24%, 69 of the books are nonfiction. And I was pretty excited that we had such a high percentage of nonfiction.
Another thing that I noticed was
Yeah.
that we had a dozen graphic novels that were submitted,
Mm-hmm.
although only one had enough votes to make it into our final list. And by the way, in order to make it into our final list, a book had to have 3 votes. And we had to cut it off there because if we counted books that had 2 votes, this would be a very, very long video, a very long list. So 3 votes was our cutoff. We also had a dozen works of poetry submitted, but not one of them made the top list. And we had about 20 short story collections, and not one of those made the top list. So
I liked that they were on the list, though.
mhm,
I
mhm.
thought it showed a lot of variety. You know, if people saw the whole list, the variety was definitely there, which I really liked. So our stats overall, from the 352 books that were submitted, I have read 99 of them, which is 28%. But wait till you hear this next stat.
I read 230 of them, so that's about 65%. And that doesn't surprise me because I do read a lot of books and I read a lot of Canadian books.
It doesn't surprise me either, but it definitely was a confirmation to me, or an affirmation maybe, that I picked the right person to do the project with. So I thought that number was phenomenal. It's so good.
Out of the 67 books that are on our top uh, CanLit, the 21st century, 60 are fiction and 7 are nonfiction. So 10% of the list is nonfiction.
Yeah, exciting. 30 of them are historical fiction. That's 45% of the list is historical fiction.
Very
Uh,
popular.
very popular. And speculative fiction. 17 of the books were speculative fiction, which is 25%. That's also pretty popular.
Another really exciting thing about this list is that there are so many Indigenous authors included on it. So I counted 14 Indigenous authors with 16 different books. And uh, there are also a lot of Black, Indigenous, people of color. You know, if we expand that category, we're counting 30 now out of 67. And I love seeing that diversity in this list. And another thing, 3 of the books were originally written in French by authors from Quebec and translated to English. We did include a title. If people nominated in French or the English translation, we put those votes together. But we'll get to that a bit later in the list. So out of these 67 books, I have read 63 of them. So there's only 4 that I haven't got to. And I'm a bit sad that out of my top 10 list, only 6 made the list. So 4 of my favorites did not get on here, but I do. I like things that are a little weirder and more off the beaten path. So I'll explain it that way, I guess.
I think 6 out of 10 is still really, really good. Yeah. Do you want to talk about your most anticipated read from the list that you haven't read?
Oh, yeah. So out of those 4 that I haven't read yet, the one that I'm most excited about reading is Naomi Klein's Doppelganger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that one too, actually. For myself, out of the 67, I've read 44, which I thought was good until I heard Lindy's numbers. For the submissions, 9 out of 10 of my books actually made the top. I'm a little disappointed in the one that didn't, but it's okay. It was a nonfiction book, and so I would have been surprised actually had it received a lot more. But I can talk about it some other time, so it's all good. And because there's so many that I still haven't read, I mean, technically I want to read all of the books that I haven't read, but I have 3 that I have on my shelf that I'm really looking forward to reading. And that's Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeline Teen. Is it Tien? Teen? How do you say her last name? Do you know?
Tien, I think.
Tien? Okay, Tien. Run Towards the Danger by Sarah Polley. I actually just picked that book up, so I'm looking forward to reading that. And one of the books that really got my attention during this project, especially, was The Birds Rain Down, and it's by Jocelyn Saucier and translated from the French by Rhonda Mullins. So those 3 are pretty high up on my list.
And that's the title that I mentioned, that some people also nominated the French edition of it.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Are we ready to share these books?
Let's get to it.
All right. I'm so excited. We are ready to share the top 67 best Canlit books of the 21st century, voted on by all of you. And at number 67, we have Mercy Among the Children by David Adams Richards, published in 2000. And both Lindy and I think that this is interesting that this even made the list, because it is the last book that we buddy read together, or at least attempted to buddy read it, because I ended up having to not finish the book, but I will go back to it and finish it. So that's 67.
Yeah, it's a pretty bleak story set in New Brunswick, in showing a family in extreme poverty. But I ended up loving it. Yeah, I think it is really good. It's about a man who vows that he is never going to harm another person. And then he makes this vow as a child. And how people react to him throughout his life for being a pacifist. So the next one, I should mention that there's a whole block of books that all got 3 votes. So 18 books. So all of these that are together all got the same number of votes as Mercy Among the Children. And they're pretty much in order by their publication date. There's a little bit of switching around that we've done, but in general, they're by publication date. In case you're wondering how we did this. So next we have The Stone Carvers by Jane Urquhart, and it was published in 2001. And this is a multi-generational story that starts in 19th century Ontario with a German woodcarver who moved to Canada and his descendants. And it does have a lot to do with the First World War and the Vimy Ridge Memorial and the carving of that memorial.
The Stone Carvers was one of my votes. I absolutely loved that book. And I was at Vimy Ridge when I read the book. So I think that helped. And it just made that statue come to life for me. So, yeah, it was incredible. It was incredible. At 65 is A Complicated Kindness by Miriam Taves. And this was published in 2004. And I read this a million years ago and remember a little bit about it, but I don't really remember much. You might remember more, Indy, but...
It's a coming-of-age story of a Mennonite girl, and it does mirror Miriam Taves, the author's experience.
Oh, okay.
And there are more books by Miriam Taves yet to come on this list. So. At number 64, we have 3-Day Road by Joseph Boyden. Another story that's set in World War I.
Number 63 is Still Life by Louise Penny, also published in 2005. And this is the beginning of her I think she has like 20 some books in a series, and I can't think of the name of the detective now. And I've never read one of those books, but I know all about them, so I really need to start this series.
Inspector Gamache.
That's it.
And the village of 3 Pines, Quebec.
Yes.
Next is Lullabies for Little Criminals by Heather O'Neill. This is her debut. There were three other books by Heather O'Neill that were mentioned. This one came out in 2006, and
Mhm.
it's a girl growing up in Montreal. Uh, Again, the author's own experiences are reflected in this story.
At 61, we have The Cellist of Sarajevo by Stephen Galloway from 2008. And I read this as part of a book club at the time that I was kind of running. And I loved this book. The idea of the man who goes out and plays his cello every day during the war, and just the way that that story is written, it's like starkly beautiful, if that makes sense. There is just something so like there's a lot of that's not said in it as well, and that's just as important about what's said. And I've always just had a special place in my heart with this book. Yeah.
Ah, yeah, I didn't find out until after I'd read it that the man that Stephen Galloway based the story on, because it's based on a true story, was really upset about him writing this and not.
Oh.
Uh, I can't remember if it wasn't that he didn't credit him or there was just some controversy about it. So if anybody's interested, you would just need to, do a search online and you could find out more information about that.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
At number 60, there's Celia's Song by Lee Miracle, and that was published in 2014. Um, this is actually not my favorite of hers. I really liked Raven's Song, but Celia's Song has got some fantastical elements in it that are related to Indigenous mythology. I'm trying to remember. Lee Miracle is, I think, Stolo. Is that
I
right?
think so too. I think so.
I think she's
Yeah.
a member of the Stolo people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I so this book, just to give some background to how the list came together, this book just made it onto the list at the last second. Wabgishe Grace, who is an author, voted for this book, and it was enough to give it that third vote to put it into the final list. And I was really glad. I haven't read this one by Lee Miracle. I've read other books by her, and I was really glad that she made the list.
She's got a number of books, including some that predate the 21st century.
Yes, many. Okay, number 59. This is another one that, Lindy, you might want to talk about, but because I haven't read it yet. I actually have it sitting right here because it's coming up for me. Suzanne by Aeneas Barbeau-Lavalette. I don't know if that's great. You speak French better than I, so it's translated from the French by Rhonda Mullins. And I know it's based on her grandmother. It's fiction. It's a fictionalized version, like fictionalized story, I should say, of her grandmother. And I really need to read it. So I'm going to read it for Women in Translation Month.
I think you'll really like it.
Yeah.
Next up at number 58 is Birdie by Tracy Lindbergh. So another Indigenous author. And Birdie also has some fantastical elements in it. The character Birdie is one that, when you read her story, she just stays with you. She heads to BC from Edmonton because she's looking for the beachcombers guy. What's his name?
Yes. Well, there's a few. There's Jesse. Is it Jesse? No. No, what's his name? Mellor?
It's one of the characters from the TV show anyway.
Yes.
Yeah.
which is a very Canadian TV show. Number 57 is also an Indigenous author, Son of a Trickster by Eden Robinson, which was published in 2017. And this book is the beginning of a trilogy about a young man, a teenage boy, I guess. And it kind of follows him, and it brings in the whole idea of trickster and how the trickster is used in Indigenous culture and things like that. And I've only read the first. I've only read Son of a Trickster, but I'm looking forward to reading more on it because I really liked how she brought that idea into the story and how she used the characters. And he's basically, I remember him making pot cookies. This is what I remember. And it's been a while since I read this.
Did you remember the river otters, the cannibal
the river
otters? Yeah.
Yes, I do now that you said that. Yeah, and how she brings that into it. So,
and there's
yeah,
so much humor too.
Yes,
this whole series, it's got a lot of. I laughed a lot when I was reading it.
It is. It definitely
really scary parts too.
I was just going to say that it's one of those times where, like, I really like when authors are able to do that. It's a pretty serious topic. There's serious things discussed and covered, but it can make you laugh as well, and it has both, and I do like that.
At number 56, there's Ridge Runner by Jill Adamson. Now, is it Gil or Jill?
I think it's Jill, but
Jill.
Yeah.
Jill Adamson. Okay, that was published in 2020, and it is a companion book to Outlander. There are some characters that cross over, but Outlander happened earlier. You could read Ridge Runner on its own, though. It's set in Banff in the early 20th century.
Number 55, we have Butter, Honey, Pig Bread, which I always think is a fantastic title. It's by Francesca Equiasi, and it was published in 2020 as well. This is about two twins, sisters. It's set in Nigeria. And I'm trying to think, because I know the mother is involved too, and I'm trying to remember the premise of this story where the sisters kind of go their own way, right? They kind of have their own different paths in life, and then they kind of realize that something has happened in the past, and they come to terms with that in their own way as well. So
yeah, definitely a family story. One of the sisters is queer.
Yes.
Yeah. At number 54, it's Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. And I think there were 3 or 4 titles by Emily St. John Mandel. This is one of them. That one came out in 2022. This is a story that has multiple narratives that come together. It's definitely speculative fiction. It's like a puzzle of a book, which is the kind of book that Emily St. John Mandel tends to write. And I just found it so much fun. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed it.
Number 53 is Study for Obedience by Sarah Bernstein, published in 2023. And this book, I think this is one of those books that you either really, really like it or you really, really don't. I lean a little bit more to the I like it. I think I need to reread it. After I read it, I thought, I think I'll get more out of this when I reread it. It's there's not, in my opinion, there wasn't a whole lot of plot to it. It was very much about the main character's inner journey, and how she's treated in this community where she goes to stay with her brother, if I remember correctly. And yeah, I read it. I was like, okay, this is okay. But I think if I were to read it again, I would get more of the nuances that were there and understand it a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, this one hit me the right way.
Yeah.
I was quite delighted by it. And it was an award winner. So if you like literary fiction that's a little bit out there, yeah, certainly give this one a try if you haven't already. So this next one, number 51, is Doppelganger, A Trip into the Mirror World by Naomi Klein, published in 2023. So I have not read this yet, but I do plan to. And it's Klein is writing about how, for some reason, she's often been mistaken for another author whose first name is Naomi Wolf,
Oh,
which I mean, I don't know if they look the same or anything, but just because they happen to have the same first name and they both write nonfiction.
number 51 is another one of my most anticipated books, if I were to have picked another one. It's A History of Burning by Giannica Oza, also published in 2023. I really want to read this. I really don't know what it's about, and I kind of want to go into it as blind as possible.
Well,
Go ahead. Say what you want to say.
Jolene. It's a Jolene book.
Is it?
Yes.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have a feeling that you're right, just from the
Family
little bit.
family generations, and it starts out in Uganda.
Okay.
Well, actually, it starts out in India, and then British East Africa, and then Uganda, and then Canada.
Okay. Yeah, it's high on my wish list because I don't have this one yet to
At
read.
number
So
50, I have The Adversary by Michael Crummy. And this is Crummy's most recent novel. It was published in 2023. It's historical fiction that is a pairing with an earlier book of his that's also on the list. So I want to talk about his three other books that made the list, all in the next category up with 4 votes each. And those books are The Innocents, Sweetland, and Galore. So all of these books are historical fiction, all set in Newfoundland. So we have The Adversary and The Innocents, both happening at the very same time. The Innocents is about a brother and sister whose parents and baby sibling die, and so they're left alone as young teens in a remote fishing outpost, where there's a ship that comes twice a year to bring supplies and buy the fish that they've collected. And then kind of over around the point, there's a little village, and that's where The Adversary takes place.
okay.
Yeah. And Sweetland is in the more recent past, where there's an island off the coast of Newfoundland where the government is not going to be supplying services there anymore. So they pay people to leave that island, except there's one person who doesn't want to leave.
That sounds really good.
Yeah. And in Galore, there's a guy who washes up, stranger comes to town kind of story. But all of Michael Crummy's works are so rich with Newfoundland dialect and sort of antique kind of words. He's also a poet. He's published about 7 books of poetry. And I know there was at least one other book of his that didn't make it to our top 67, but he's definitely a beloved author here in Canada.
I think it was a book of poetry actually that didn't make it. I think one of them was, yeah. I'm glad you talked about that because I read my first Michael Crummy book this year and it was The Innocents and I loved it. And I cannot wait to read more from him. So now you've made me want to read even more. So that brings us to number 46. And we're still on the books that received 4 votes. And this is another author that has already been on the list. And this is Eden Robinson's Monkey Beach. And this was published in 2000. And I believe this was her debut novel.
Yes, it was. And this was on my list of top 10.
Oh, yay!
I've read it 3 times.
Wow, I have yet to read it. So it's one of my anticipated books. So.
Next is Unless by Carol Shields. That was published in 2002. This one is set in near contemporary times. A woman whose daughter has decided to leave university and live on the streets. And uh, it's breaking her heart. It's a story about mental health and how the world affects us these days.
Next up is number 44, and it's Rue, and this is by Kim Thuy. It's translated from the French by Sheila Fishman. This was published in 2009. And this book, it's a quick read. It's a short little book. I always say that Kim Thuy has the most beautiful writing. It's very, poetic isn't even the right word. It's this beautiful way of, and obviously it says something about the translator as well, to be able to bring that kind of feeling into a translated work. But the writing is unlike anything else that I've ever read. And Rue is about a young girl from Vietnam who immigrates to Canada. I believe it's kind of, it's fiction, but it's autobiographical to some of her experiences as well, and how their family, makes their way in Canada. So it's so beautifully written.
Yeah, she is one of my must-read authors. I've read everything that she's published. I just love her style. Next, there's A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki, and that was published in 2013. This is a dual timeline kind of story with a woman named Ruth who lives on Vancouver Island, and a metal lunchbox carefully wrapped up is washed up as part of a tsunami, and inside there's a journal of a schoolgirl. So that's the other story of a girl named Nao who's living in Japan and being bullied there.
Number 42 is Small Game Hunting at the Local Coward Gun Shop. And this is by Megan Gale Coles. It's published in 2019. And this book is an intense book. It's an intense read. It takes place in Newfoundland as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it takes place over like a 24-hour period. It's like one day when there's a snowstorm and everyone gathers at this restaurant, and you start to find out who these people really are and how certain people have been treated and what is going on within the community, what is being allowed to happen within the community. And it's one of those books that I always say there is not one word that is kind of out of place. Every word in it is there for a purpose. It's quite a story.
This is one that I have not read. Well, I started reading it and I could tell that it was too intense for me at that time. And then I never did go back to it.
Okay.
Sounds like I should.
It is intense. If you can handle the intensity, because I think it is a lot. I do think that you would end up enjoying it at the end. But it is intense, and the whole book is intense like that. So you have to be prepared to be in that intensity for a while.
Okay. Next is The Pull of the Stars by Emma Donoghue, and that came out in 2020. And the timing that it came out at the time of the COVID-19 pandemic was entirely coincidental. The Pull of the Stars is about the great flu epidemic of 1919, 1920 during the First World War, and it's set in Dublin in a makeshift maternity ward within a hospital. The maternity ward is especially for mothers who have the flu, and it's pretty intense.
It is. That's a good one. It's another one that it only spans like 3 days. It doesn't take long to get through that story, but it's intense in those 3 days. So
lots of obstetrics in it.
Yes, that's right. Number 40 is When We Lost Our Heads by Heather O'Neill. So we've seen her on this list before, and this was also published in 2022. I have yet to read Heather O'Neill, don't tell her. But I think I own 4 of her books, this being one of them. So I will get to it.
This one is it's both a historical but also playfully anachronistic and magic realism. Yeah, all of her books are quite playful, really.
Yeah. I look forward to reading her.
Next, so I've got number 39 for this. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Burnham Wood by Eleanor Catton, which came out in 2023. Ah, eco thriller, if you can. It's a pretty slow pace for a thriller. So if you're like me and you're not really fond of thrillers, then you you can pick up this one pretty safely. Things don't pick up to a really fast speed till you're really close to the end. It's really about a whole bunch of different characters involved in um, planting vegetables in wasteland in order to make use of land for growing food for people.
Okay.
But they kind of come head to head with this multimillionaire kind of guy who happens to have a lot of land. Yeah, and things happen. Things happen.
Number 38 and 37 are by the same author. And these are now, sorry, this next category is books that have 5 votes. So the first two, 38 and 37, are by Margaret Atwood and Oryx and Crake, which is the first book of a trilogy that she did, sci-fi dystopia type thing. As it creates a new world, and for someone who doesn't read a lot of sci-fi and doesn't always get along with those kind of books, I really liked Oryx and Crake. It was published in 2003, and then The Testaments, which is the duology, I guess, the second book after The Handmaid's Tale, which was published in 1985. So in 2019, she published The Testaments, and it is, and I really liked it. This is another one where I think some people go, nope, this should never have been written, and then other people like myself, who I really like how she took the story that we know so well and showed it to us from a different perspective. And I was not expecting that. So I really enjoyed it. So yeah, so Oryx and Crake and The Testaments. Yeah, 2 very different kinds of books. But
And I think Margaret Atwood was the author who had the most uh, different titles nominated. I think there were
I
a
think
total of 6.
yes.
Number 36, we have Half-Blood Blues by Essie Edugen. And this one is, I guess it's a dual timeline. It's set in Germany, where a musician that nobody had heard from gets tracked down. And it's the Second World War, and yeah, a black musician in Germany and what happened to him.
Yes.
And well, excellent story. Really, really good.
I think so too. I really enjoyed that one.
Essie Edugen is a Black Canadian author from Calgary.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is Jolene's hometown now.
Yeah, it is. And that she now lives in BC, so she's close to you.
She?
Yeah. Yeah. At number 35 is The Orenda by Joseph Boyden, published in 2013. This is the 3rd book. I think it was a trilogy. Yes? The 3 books? No? I'm making that up in my head.
It goes all the way back to early contact between the French missionaries and the people of the Wendat, and yeah, so it's 17th century Canada. Okay. Now we are into books that got 6 votes each. starting with Crow Lake by Mary Lawson, that came out in 2002. And this is a story about siblings who grew up in Northern Ontario. And unhappy things happened in their family, but it's a story about them reuniting.
It's one of my favorites. I love that book.
Hmm.
Number 33 is The Birth House by Amy McKay, and it was published in 2006. And this takes place in the East Coast in Nova Scotia. And it's about, it's about a birth house. I know that sounds silly. It seems kind of obvious. But yeah, the main character finds, it's kind of like a found family as well. The main character finds interesting people and finds her way to this birth house. And I
had a copy on my shelf for so many years.
think you would like
And
it.
when I packed up my books and got rid of a bunch of them, I thought I'm never going to read this, and so I got rid of that one.
Okay. Okay. So yeah. Okay. So the birth house is the main character is a young girl, and she finds her way into this birth house, and she kind of befriends the midwife, and she learns about midwifery and what's going on kind of behind the scenes and in the, with these unwed mothers who are either in hiding or whatever the case might be. It's an interesting story. I remember some very vivid scenes from it, and I think you would really like it,
I
Lindy.
know that I really love this next one.
Okay, good, because I haven't read it, this one.
At number 32, The Sisters Brothers by Patrick DeWitt. It came out in 2011. It is dark and it is funny. So, yeah, black humor for sure.
I love dark humor, and I just picked this up because we had read a different book by him, and I enjoyed it. So I thought, I'll try this one out. So I'm glad to hear you liked it. Number 31 is 15 Dogs by Andre Alexis, published in 2015. And this is a very, it's kind of like a mythological, philosophical book. And the dogs, like real dogs, are the main characters, and they talk about good and evil. It's really a book about good and evil. I'll say that.
Very philosophical. Yeah.
Very philosophical. I can see it not being a book for everyone, but I think if you're able to kind of just enjoy it for what it is, it's a good book. Yeah.
So this next one, which is number 30, is Johnny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. It came out in 2018. Joshua Whitehead is Oji Cree from Manitoba. And in Johnny Appleseed, we have a young Indigenous man who is making his way by what's the politically correct way to say selling sex?
Yeah, there is a word.
Sex worker.
Sex worker, yeah.
Yeah. In order to make enough money to get home to his reserve for something that's happening there.
Yeah.
And he's such a great character. Yeah, Johnny Appleseed is a wonderful character. Yeah, you can't help but feel for him.
Number 29 is a nonfiction, and it's A Mind Spread Out on the Ground. It's by Alicia Elliott, published in 2019. And this is a collection of essays, autobiographical, about kind of snippets of Alicia Elliott's life, and it has themes of mental health and Indigenous communities, intergenerational trauma, and yes, and social justice. And it's just when I first read this book, I knew that she was an author to watch. So I will pick up anything that she writes.
Next is another Anishinaabe author, Leanne Bedasamose Simpson, and her book Nopaming. comes in at number 28. This was one that was on my list.
Yay!
I read it twice. I'll definitely be reading it again. Absolutely adore this book, uh, which it's really hard to say what it's about. Maybe a woman who's frozen in a lake.
Yeah.
There are um, archetypal characters from Anishinaabe mythology that are also uh, real people going about in the urban center of Toronto. And it's exhilarating. It's just amazing, amazing, amazing.
It is. And it's this is poetry in a way because of the way the book is structured. Like it's not written like a novel, if you know what I'm saying. It
I,
has a little, yeah,
I had never thought of it as
yeah,
poetry.
yeah, yeah. I read it as poetry when I read it, and I think that's why I loved it so much.
It's
Yeah.
definitely a non-standard type of
Mhm.
prose.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's the way of putting it. Next up, did you vote for this as well, Wendy?
Yeah.
Number 27 is Fane by Anne Marie MacDonald, published in 2022. This is such a good book. It's an epic story, really, and it's about a young person who is growing up on. Is it between Scotland and England?
Mhm.
Yes. The estate is like on the border of Scotland and England, which is significant to the story. And um, we learn about this young girl who is being educated and she's smart. And yet there's something that she can't quite figure out. You know, she's living with her father. They seem to have a really good relationship. He's told her what has happened to her mother um, and to her brother, and she just kind of feels like something's not quite right, and she kind of rebels a little bit when the father brings in a tutor. And it's just following her story and finding out, you know, as she learns about who she is. And it's so, I loved how this was written. I love so much about this book, and I know you did too. So I should really let you talk about it.
Well, this really dense, rich, sort of Victorian style is not usually my thing, but I was entirely wrapped up in it. And it was my top book of 2022.
I
Yeah.
could see that the setting was incredible. Like there was just so much about it that was so good. So I can see why you would choose it.
Next, we are into the books that had 7 votes each, starting with at number 26, The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. It came out in the year 2000. It did win the Booker Prize.
Oh, number 25 is And the Birds Rain Down by Jocelyn Saucier, translated from the French by Rhonda Mullins, published in 2011. So this is one of the books that I really want to read. This is my most anticipated. Again, I don't know a whole lot about this because I kind of want to go into it blind, but I believe, and Lindy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's about these two 80-year-olds, is that who like go and want to live, I don't know if they want to live off the land, but they want to live kind of like a hermit in the middle of nowhere and just live life their way. And then somebody or a couple of people arrive and kind of change their change their plans. They ruin those plans. So I don't know if I'm doing justice to what it's about because I haven't read it, but I really want to read it. It sounds really good.
Yeah, it is a book about really old protagonists in
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
There's a major forest fire that's in it too. This is one that I read in French,
Oh.
and uh, yeah, I don't read very many books in French language.
Yeah.
I remember really loving this one.
Yeah, it's been getting a lot of love. So 7 votes. I thought I better read this. So,
At number 24, we've got Scarborough by Catherine Hernandez that came out in 2017. And it is set in Scarborough, kind of a suburb of Toronto.
yeah.
And we get to know a lot of different people who live there and how they interact with each other. Very a very diverse group of people.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it's
I like
that
this one.
sense of community and uh, people looking out for each other. It's really strong in this.
Yeah. I like the diversity in it. Number 23 is Run Towards the Danger by Sarah Polley, published in 2022. So, as I said, this is one of my most anticipated books and that I just picked up. So, I'll be reading it soon. I don't know a whole lot about it. I know that it's, I think, written in essay format as well. Linda, you've read this, right? Have you?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Is this one of your?
It twice. And each essay is so powerful.
Okay.
I had to take a break from it after each essay.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. That says something. I think everyone knows, but in case people don't know, Sarah Polley is an actress, director, like does a lot of in film. Um, so yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading it.
And next at number 22, we have a book that got 8 votes, and that is Room by Emma Donoghue that came out in 2010. Emma Donoghue does tend to get her inspiration from news stories, and Room was inspired, I think, by several of these terrible things that have happened where men have captured young women and kept them um, uh, chained up or enclosed for a long period of time. And that's the story in Room. But we do get to see the story from a child's point of view.
Yeah, I think that part's done brilliantly. I
Mm-hmm.
thought she did that really well. Number 21 is The Sleeping Car Porter. And this is by another Calgarian, so that makes me happy, Suzette Mayer. And this was published in 2022. And this is about, well, really, I think it's about some of Canada's history that isn't talked about a whole lot. And that is these sleeping car porters. They would hire Black people to be the porters and how they were treated. And in the main character in this particular story, um, not only is he Black, but he's also queer, and he's having to hide that. And it's it just has a lot of layers to it, and it's basically the journey across. Well, I think where does it start from?
From
Montreal,
Montreal. Mm-hmm.
Montreal, Montreal, and they come this way through Banff, which was kind of neat because I was like, oh, I know all of these places. So it kind of goes along that journey, and yeah, how he is treated and how he has to, hide who he is and what life was like for him.
And not getting any sleep
Yes.
because he has to work through the night too.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So you
expected
can
to
imagine
do.
after several days, you're starting to see things.
Yeah. I think my thing was like expected to do everything so perfectly and could be fired for doing just a minuscule mistake. And yeah, the expectations were outrageous. So
We are into the books that got 9 votes now. And I'm going to talk about 2 of them because they are both by Richard Wagamese at 19 and 20. We have Medicine Walk and Indian Horse. Now, Richard Wagamese had 5 titles nominated. These, I think, were the only 2 that made it to our top 67. But I have also read quite a few of his books, but not Medicine Walk.
Oh,
That's one that I have not read. Indian Horse is about uh, growing up in a residential school and how that affected him the rest of his life.
I voted for Indian Horse. It's one of my favorite. Richard Wagamese is one of my favorites. And Medicine Walk is about a young young man who reconnects with his father, and his father is dying, and they go on the walk to bring his father to where he will find his resting place. And it's a very powerful book as well. Yeah, both are. Yeah. So number 18 is Brother by David Cheriandy. This is another one of those, those small books that make an impact. This is one of those. Oh, I don't even know what to say about this book because I don't want to give anything away.
It's about brothers. Music. It's about having hopes and dreams and having the cards stacked against you. When you're a brown skinned person in Canada, David Cheriandry has Trinidadian ancestry, and so do his characters in this novel.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book.
Okay, we are on to books that got 10 votes. At number 17, Life of Pi by Jan Martel, which came out in 2001. And this is one of the books that also made it onto the New York Times Reader's Choice Top 100 books. So Life of Pi is a fantastical tale about a boy whose parents had a zoo, and he ends up in a boat in the ocean with a tiger. I think that's all you need to know about this book.
That's pretty good. I love this book. I love this story. Number 16. I have all of my most anticipated books. So Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeline Tien. I have not read. It was published in 2016, but I think this is maybe my most anticipated because every time I talk to someone about this book or someone shares about this book, they gush about this book. And I think, why haven't I read that yet? It's sitting on my shelf. Why haven't I read it? And so I will get to it this year. So, and I think, is this one that you voted for, Lindy?
Yes.
So it has your vote.
This was in my top 10. It's great.
Yeah.
At number 15, we have Seven Fallen Feathers by Tanya Talaga. This is nonfiction. It's a heartbreaking story about teenage Indigenous youth who travel from their home reserves in Northern Ontario to Thunder Bay so that they can attend high school. And over the course of about 10 years, I think 7 of these individuals died under mysterious circumstances. And initially, their deaths weren't very thoroughly investigated. And so Tanya Talaga is a journalist was asking questions.
The next book is also a nonfiction book and a powerful book, in my opinion, and it is at number 14, From the Ashes by Jesse Thistle. And this was published in 2019. This is the story about Jesse, who is Métis, and he has been homeless, and he has had addictions, and just how he turned his life around and how he came out of that, even though, again, that things were stacked against him. The system is not always helpful in some ways, and the way the story is told is so heart-wrenching, but also like endearing, that you can't help but root for Jesse. And yeah, it's I think it's one of the best memoirs that has come out in the last number of years, and it's certainly made a huge splash in Canadian literature. So yeah, yeah.
He's a great writer, and it's amazing that he's still alive.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the things that happened to him.
And doing so well, right? Like, I love that he's doing so well and that he's successful and continues to, yeah, do well. So,
And there's one more book that got 10 votes at number 13. It is Ducks, 2 Years in the Oil Sands by Kate Beaton. Came out in 2022. And this is a memoir in graphic format. Kate Beaton is a cartoonist, also had one of her collections of cartoons nominated, but did not make our top 67. So she's writing about going to work in Fort McMurray in order to make money to pay off her student loans. And her depiction of what life is like there in the oil sands, where the majority of the workers are men, far away from their families, in harsh conditions. The weather's very cold, lots of darkness. The job itself is dangerous, and so it's lots of mental health problems there. Yeah, just the way she depicts the working conditions and what her colleagues were like, and how tenderly she talks about them, even those that didn't always treat her so well. Yeah, I just thought it was amazing.
it's one of those stories that's not really told a whole lot. Like, I think it opened up the eyes of a lot of people who, don't really know about that life. So we're in our top 12. And these next books all had 11 votes. First is The Inconvenient Indian at number 12. And this is by Thomas King, published in 2012. And Thomas King is one of those writers who can take serious topics, which he does in this book, talking about Indigenous life and how Indigenous life is depicted, in movies, and how there's just kind of this way that we, have been taught to think because of the way people have been portrayed. And yet he does it in a way that is humorous and kind of pokes fun, in a good way. But this is a powerful book. He does it in such a way that you realize how silly some of this is. And The Inconvenient Indian is a really, really, I think it's one of those books that all Canadians should read, actually. Yeah.
I agree. And the next book is also by an Indigenous author, Cherie Demoline. It is The Marrow Thieves. So this is science fiction set in the near future. And in this time, most people can't dream anymore. And Indigenous people can still dream. And nefarious things are happening. Ooh, spooky stuff.
It's true. It's a good
adventure. It's an adventure story.
Yes. Number 10, we have Washington Black by Essie Adujan, published in 2018. And Wash is the main character. And he has grown up so far on a plantation. And he gets kind of chosen, I will say, to by one of the owners, the owner's son, I think, to go and because he's good at drawing. And so the owner's son thinks he can help him with the different kind of scientific experiments that he's doing. And so he takes him under his wing, and he lives a very different life than he would have if he had stayed on the plantation and had been a slave. And you can't help but just love Washington Black. He's such a wonderful character, and it's a bit of an adventure story too. You know, they travel around. Um, it's also heartbreaking, um, and yeah, Washington Black's a good one. I enjoy that one.
At number 9, we have What Strange Paradise by Omar El Akkad, which is it's set in an unnamed country where uh, economic migrants and refugees are washing up. So it's some place like it could be one of the islands of Greece, for example. And we follow what happens to one boy who washes up there on the shore, the sole survivor from his ship. And yeah, as you can imagine, it's quite the tale.
Number 8 is Women Talking by Miriam Toews, published in 2018. And Miriam Toews, again, one of the ones I haven't read. So I do have this one, and I have a feeling now. I think you've probably read it, Lindy, so you can probably say, but I think this is going to be an intense read, talking about intense reads. Um, and yeah, maybe I'll have you describe it because you'll know more than I. I'm just guessing what I have to say about it. So,
Well, it is based on a true story, although this is fictionalized. But a Mennonite colony in Bolivia. What has happened is a whole bunch of the women have been drugged at night and raped, and with from children all the way into women of all ages.
mm-hmm.
And some of the perpetrators have been caught and were arrested by authorities. And so the men of the colony have gone to bail them out. And so this story is about the women deciding what are they going to do when these men come back? What are they going to do? And so it's all conversation. And none of them are literate. They were never taught to read and write. So that's one of the uh, one of the major stumbling points for them to figure out like why they can't leave, or maybe they can't leave.
I'll have to be in the right space when I read that.
It's
Yeah,
very well done, very
yeah,
well done. Yeah,
I've heard good.
done with so much heart and showing the faith of these women, the faith in God, and how that affects their day to day life. So we're now in the final 7, and all of these stand alone. They aren't paired with any others. They each got enough votes to take their stand. So at number 7 we have All My Puny Sorrows, also by Miriam Toews. 5 of her books were nominated, in this project. And All My Puny Sorrows is my number 1 favorite. This is in my top 10. Uh, it's it's the very typical Miriam Toews, as opposed to Women Talking. That one is an atypical book of hers because more typically she has humor combined with the very serious topics. And in this one, in the same sentence, you could laugh and cry. It is about sisters, 2 sisters, and one of them is suicidal, and she's in hospital. And so her younger sister is trying to convince her life is we want you to stay. So
So number 6, I would say that these top 6, or maybe the next 5, were the ones that moved around. They would switch places. Sometimes, as we would receive submissions, it might be number 2, then it'd be number 3, then it'd be number 2 again, then they'd be number 4, then they kept switching around these next ones. So it's interesting where they ended. But at number 6, number 6 is Moon of the Crusted Snow by Wabgashig Rice, and this was published in 2018. And again, I think that the timing, this came out, 2 years before the pandemic, and I think it was doing okay, but then the pandemic happened, and everybody was reading this book. And this is one of the few books, again, that I reread this year, because the next book had come out, Moon of the Turning Leaves. And so this is a story based on a northern community where when electricity fails, something happens, and they're so isolated they don't really know what. This community figures out how are they going to survive and how are they going to live off the land. And they have some unexpected guests. And it is so well done. And I think that, I've said this often, that Wab is one of the authors we need to be paying attention to. And with Moon of the Turning Leaves, again, I just loved it. So I'm happy to see this so high.
And at number 5, The Break by Katharina Vermette, which came out in 2016. So another Indigenous author. Katharina Vermette is Métis from Winnipeg, which is where The Break is set. Mm-hmm. A woman sees a crime being committed, but her window is quite high up, so she can sort of see, but not exactly. And it's the aftermath then of this incident.
Yes. Another powerful read. At number 4, with 24 votes, was Greenwood by Michael Christie, published in 2019. I love this book. So what's it called? The withering has happened, where trees don't exist everywhere anymore. And we learn about the Greenwood family. And the way that the story is structured is through tree rings. And it goes back in time and then forward in time. Well, actually into the near future, 2030s, I think it is. And it's told in such a beautiful way. Everett, one of the main characters, is one of my favorite characters that I have read in a long time. And yeah, it talks about, it's the whole idea of the family tree, but it's also about the way that we treat nature and how we treat one another. And I just think it's beautifully done. Yeah.
Number 3, with 26 votes, we have The Book of Negroes by Lawrence Hill, published in 2007. And in the US, this was called Someone Knows My Name. Historical fiction that starts out in a village in Africa. We follow a child named Aminata, who is abducted, sold into slavery, and eventually gets her freedom. But yeah, it's her life from a small child all the way into old age. It's so well done.
So well done. And Lawrence Hill is one of 3, in my opinion, 3 male authors who really writes female characters well. Where I'm like, wow, you captured that, So, and I think he did that very well here in this book. Yeah. Number 2, we're getting down to the number 2 with 28 votes. It's 5 Little Indians by Michelle Good. And this was published in 2020. And this book follows 5 young people And after they leave a residential school, they and they're either forced out because of their age or they escape. And it's how they survive and what happens to them. And I think it's one of the best books that I've read about um, the trauma of that and how it affects people without it telling you that that's what it's about, if that makes sense. And it's just done in a beautiful way. The five characters, they like remain in my heart, and I have a special place for all of them. Um, and it's, you know, some of them, and they kind of help each other as well. So it's about like the community that they build around each other to support one another. Um, and yeah, it's just a beautifully written book.
Okay, we're up to
All
number
right, ladies.
one.
Yeah.
3 votes. It's Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, just first published in 2014. And this book was also on both New York Times top 100 lists. So
Yes.
it doesn't surprise me that we've got it here on our list as well. Uh,
And it remained at the top. Yeah. You know, as submissions would come in, sometimes I'd be like, oh, maybe the other one's going to take it. No. And I go up again. So it was interesting to watch that happen too. Um, it's my favorite Emily St. John Mandel book.
yeah, mine too.
Yeah. And I didn't read it in 2014. I read it in February of 2020. So we had just read it and we were talking because things were starting to come on the news about COVID. Things were happening in China. At book club, we were talking about someone we knew who her husband was in China at the time. So it was starting to hit close to home. And then within a matter of weeks, the book just, it was like it came to life in some ways. And I love the ending, I'll say. Like, I love how she brought that all together and showed it's hopeful, you know, and I liked that.
Yeah. I think she does a good job with endings and bringing kaleidoscopic kind of multiple threads together in her books in general.
Yeah. So, Lindy, that's the 67 books. So many good books. Were there any, now that at the end of the project, any surprises, any thoughts, any impressions that you had?
Well, I loved seeing the titles as they were coming in, and sometimes I was surprised by books that I had totally forgotten about, like Keturah and Lord Death by Martine Levitt. I thought, oh yeah, that's a great book. And Jessica Grant's book, Come Thou Tortoise.
Mm-hmm.
I love that book, but I had totally forgotten about it. And then there were some that I had, it never crossed my path before, right? And one of those was Phantom Pains by Therese Estacion. And right after that, I saw the CBC 30 authors to watch out for, Canadian authors to watch out for. And she was on that list. So I went and got her book at the library, and I've read it, and it is great.
Excellent.
Amazing.
That one's on my radar because of it too. I thought, how did I miss this? So yeah, that's what I want to read. Yeah, I was thrilled that the number of Indigenous authors on the list was what it was. I think had we done this project 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, I think it would have looked very different. And I'm so glad that for the most part, people are embracing the Indigenous literature, and how lucky are we? There's so many Indigenous people writing right now. The talent out there is incredible. And I am just thrilled to see so many Indigenous authors on the list. Um, and yes, like you, it really opened my eyes to so many authors that I had either not heard of or that it was a reminder, like, oh yeah, remember these books. And there's so many good books, like I said, that even had one vote. And I was like, oh, that's one of my favorites too. And that's one of my favorites too. It was hard to come up with just 10, which is what a lot of people said to me, as they were putting their submissions in. It was like, it was hard to just do 10. but, but it was a fun project. I'm so glad that we did it together. And yeah.
Me
So I
too.
think going forward that we'll share maybe some more information from the list because there is so much information to share. If people are interested in anything, please let us know in the comments. If you want to see the whole 352 books that were on the list, or if you're interested in a certain category of books, like certain genre or certain type of book, let us know because we can do videos on that. But I'm sure you'll hear more from us. At least that's my hope. Yeah, and thank you again, as Lindy said at the beginning. Thank you to everyone who participated, who sent in your votes, who took the time to think about it, and it was so great to see how many people were just as excited as we were about putting this list together. Thank you so much, Lindy, for being part of this project and doing this with me, and I look forward to collaborating with you a little bit more as we go forward with this.
That was my great pleasure, Jolene. I really enjoyed working on this too. Yeah.
Thank you. And to everyone else, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and don't forget to make every day an adventure.
Bye.